Thank you to all the members for supporting my channel. Hi there. Yeah, that's right, you all knew this one was coming. In one of my more previous videos, I ended up talking about Neuvillette, the Eudix, the Hydro Dragon, one of the most powerful characters in all of Genshin Impact's history, and I would argue he currently holds the meta hostage because there's really no effective way to nerf him without nerfing everybody else by proxy. And for the longest time, throughout Genshin's history, there have been a handful of characters that, when pitted against everybody else, were just unanimously agreed upon to be better in every way, shape, or form. This goes for all aspects of the game, whether it's if you're a really powerful DPS or an amazing support character, and for that reason, there's a little bit of a dick measuring contest for everybody involved. For the longest time, if you would have asked me, I would have told you the best buffer would have been Bennett. Bennett, overall, is one of the best characters ever in Genshin's history for his ability to heal the team and give you a very significant attack buff. There was a long period of time where if you played Genshin Impact, Bennett was going to be slotted in on all of your best teams simply because of the immense amount of support he provided. And I say this like it's all past tense, like Bennett still isn't one of the best buffers in the game, but he is. Despite being a 4-star, Bennett has stood the test of time of being one of the most powerful characters in all of Genshin Impact's history. But he's not the most powerful character, and he's definitely not the most powerful buffer anymore. This is because the overarching meta shift throughout Genshin's history have made it to where attack percent buffs simply aren't as viable. While before, every significant character of note had some sort of attack percent and damage percent scaling, meaning that a noblesse oblige, well-built Bennett was able to significantly buff the damage of your party, and that's no longer the case. Like I said in my video talking about how Dendro is too overpowered, the heavy shift from attack percent to EM percent made it to where a lot of characters in the game quite simply don't really want to use attack, especially on the best teams. During this era, elemental mastery buffers that were able to apply different elements ended up being a lot more powerful. A heavy example being Sucrose, who was able to buff elemental mastery with the use of her elemental skill and burst, as well as some passive talents, while Nahida, on the other hand, being much more significantly viable due to her ability to buff elemental mastery with the use of her burst. Not to mention, a lot of team comps in this era quite simply didn't get any benefit out of attack. This was because, at the time, a lot of the characters that were more powerful in this era received their strength from the Dendro cores, which inherently scale off of elemental mastery, making them significantly more powerful if they were using a character like Nahida rather than a character like Bennett, who, yes, will buff personal damage for the team, but in a team scaling off of characters that don't really want attack and hungry, greedy main stat DPS properties, it wasn't really that useful. Fontaine, of course, came out and shifted the meta a lot. Pre-Sumeru, everything was based off of attack. During Sumeru, everything was based off of elemental mastery, and during the run of Fontaine, significantly so more than every other region, HP dominated the meta, with use of the Bond of Life mechanic storing a set amount of your HP into a little bubble that would then give you some sort of damage bonus, and of course the HP drain mechanic activating Meretruse Hunters. A lot of characters within the region of Fontaine were heavily tied to the HP stat, and while scaling off of HP is really nice, it's also somewhat problematic because it makes it to where you can only scale off of a certain value of assets. For example, if you scale off HP, you cannot scale off of attack. You can only receive elemental and damage buffs from hydro bonus damage, crit rate, crit damage, damage percent, and shredding the enemy's defense. This means that once again, the best buffer in the game, Bennett, wasn't able to do anything. Bennett was still powerful, but the stage was very clearly being set for a new character, Furina. That's right, we're 4 minutes into this video and we're only just now mentioning the character that's based on. Furina, a lot like Bennett, is both a healer as well as a buffer, as well as an off-field DPS. Wait a minute. Yeah, Furina does a lot more than what Bennett does. Furina is a Hydro sub-DPS with the ability to swap her outfit from Oshia to Numa in order to turn her DPS into healing, while also giving you significant buffs with the use of her elemental burst. These buffs stack off of a mechanic known as fanfare, which gives players a percent amount of fanfare every time they gain or lose HP, comparable to the percent number. So if you gain 1 1% HP, you gain 1 stack of fanfare. For every stack of fanfare you have, you'll receive damage percent modifiers up to a maximum of roughly 85% to 90% at C0. But having to eat massive amounts of hits in order to stack your buff to begin with is pretty frustrating, so luckily Furina, with the use of her elemental skill at the cost of a set percent of your HP, will deal sub DPS from the side, and with all of this being HP scaling damage, it is incredibly easy to see Furina hitting 30 to 50k on non-vape hits with her sub DPS. And if you end up getting too low, Furina can simply do a charge attack, swap back to her Oshia form, and then heal the team by a significant portion with the use of her, I don't know what this is, Oceanid thing? Now there's a reason why I brought up Bennett in the beginning of the video and compared Furina to Bennett, because Furina is to percent scalers what Bennett is to attack scalers, only significantly more powerful. Bennett is a very much drop your burst and move on with your life, while Furina is more of a slowly tick up your effects while dealing off-field DPS from the side. Furina requires a lot more brain power to play and is not universally applicable due to her percent scaling. However, like I said earlier, throughout the rotation of Sumeru and early Fontaine, a lot of characters that came out didn't scale off attack percent, and Furina is the solution to that. The fact of the matter is, there is not a single character in all of Genshin Impact's history that doesn't scale off of damage percent in some way, shape, or form, which means Furina, by herself, is able to heal the team, deal sub DPS, and buff every single character in the game. And this buff is very, very significant. Furina is one of the most overpowered characters in Genshin's history just by sheer proxy of how much she does, especially because she's Hydro, and like I've discussed in my Hydro's overpowered video, if you meet the criteria of Hydro, you are ridiculously overpowered, just for the sheer amount of reactions it can proc. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Furina's off-field damage, it's very significant, not only because it's just nice to have Hydro application, but also because the damage it deals is very easy to build because it only scales off of crit rate, crit damage, Hydro bonus damage, and enemy defensive stats. And since Furina's HP will always be naturally high assuming you build it right, you hardly have to worry about that. A lot of people like to point out the fact that Furina, when played by herself, isn't really that powerful, and to that I say, no, she is a lot more powerful, you simply have to use your brain. Instead of using your DPS every rotation, you can use your DPS every other rotation and then use Furina's healing form to restore your HP back to full, making it to where you're maxing out your fanfare with just Furina alone on every single rotation. However, you don't need to do that if you don't want to, because while Furina can be a healer, and she's one of the most powerful buffers in the game, Furina is special, because if you end up building a team around her, she just blows everything else out of the water and it's not even close. Characters like Jean can be slotted in on Furina teams, and with the use of Viridescent Venerer can shred elemental resistance for Hydro by 40%, while also with the use of her burst instantly get back your entire HP percent after Furina drained it on the previous rotation. This means that every rotation after the first rotation, Furina is easily going to get a full fanfare stack with one press of a button, leaving you with 14 seconds to do whatever the hell else you want with duration. And as said previously, this buff is very, very, very significant. And to put in perspective how powerful it is, there's a character in the game known as Zhao. And Zhao's whole thing is when he uses his elemental burst, he infuses himself with an element and gives himself a damage percent modifier. Now, this damage percent is almost 100%, a lot like Furina's. And when Zhao uses this, with combination of getting elemental infusion and being able to do plunging damage, his damage almost doubles. Now, Zhao's burst only works on him. Furina's burst works on everybody. This means that a Furina buff is one of the most powerful damaging buffs you can give yourself in the entire game. But if you really want to make it even more powerful, like I said before, you can just simply slot her on a team that already has another healer. Yeah, sure, she can do it herself, but why don't you maximize Furina's damage on top of that? Like I've said throughout this video, Furina had so much going for her, there was no realistic way they were ever going to be able to make her not dominant. She has Hydro application, she has off-field DPS, she has off-field healing, she has a massive elemental damage percent buff that lasts for a very long period of time and doesn't have a very long cooldown. So any team that wants a damage percent, Hydro application, and healing automatically has a best in slot in the form of Furina. And while I usually don't like to talk about constellations when I'm talking about how overpowered a character is, Furina has some of the highest constellation ownership in the game, and they're simply too overpowered not to talk about. Furina's C1 increases the amount of fanfare you have the second you pop your burst by 100, with the maximum being raised from 300 to 400. This takes her buff from a little under 100% and pushes it all the way over the edge into the 100% border. This makes it very, very, very easy to just automatically slot Furina in on any team, because you know the second you get that burst off, you're automatically gonna have some sort of damage percent scaling. But her second constellation, and one of the most owned constellations in the game, is unironically probably the most powerful constellation in the game. It essentially makes it so that Furina is full stacking Fanfare in 3 seconds by herself on every rotation for the rest of the time you play Furina, making it to where, yes, you could put a healer on for faster, to just straight up, no, you don't need a healer. It increases the amount of Fanfare you receive by 250%, and then on top of that, once you reach above the limit of Fanfare, you can continue stacking, eventually increasing Furina's HP by a maximum of 140%. This means that Furina's off-field damage will increase significantly while also increasing her healing, while also making her buffs more powerful. In my opinion, this is the most powerful constellation in the entire game. Would you rather get a C6 on another character that increases their own damage significantly? Or would you rather get a C2 on Furina that increases everybody's damage significantly while also increasing her own damage by almost double? A tough choice. But even without C2, like I said in this whole video, C0 Furina is overwhelmingly dominant. The only thing that lightly holds her back is her need to have another healer on the team for full stacking Fanfare instantly, but even then she doesn't need that because she can full stack it herself if given enough time and proper playstyle. Much like how I said in my Nouvellette video, I don't really see how they're gonna phase her out. With Hydro being as dominant as it is in the meta, and with her buff being as big as it is and universally applicable, unlike a character like Bennett or, of course, Nahida, there's really no way they're going to be able to power creep her unless they just make something objectively better. That all being said, like, comment, subscribe. See ya.